For thousands of years, two forces have stood locked in battle. On one side, the promises of God, clear, unstoppable, written into the fabric of prophecy. On the other, the doubts of men, the hatred of nations, and the blindness of hearts. The battlefield is not hidden in some distant galaxy. It is right in front of us, centered on a strip of land smaller than New Jersey, Israel. The Bible declares in Zechariah 12:2, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the surrounding peoples." That prophecy is not ancient poetry. It is the spark of a conflict that has spilled into war's politics and the headlines you scroll past every morning. Why does this tiny nation draw the fury of the world? Why does Jerusalem carry a weight that even empires cannot lift without breaking themselves? This is not just about geography. It is about destiny. Because hidden within this conflict is a key, the moment when Israel finally looks upon the one they pierced and declares him as Messiah. When that day comes, the struggle between blindness and revelation, rejection and acceptance will break open into the greatest awakening the world has ever seen. Stay with me, because once you see the three prophetic signs already aligning, you'll realize we are closer than anyone imagines to the moment when Israel will finally accept Jesus as their Messiah. The hidden key to Christ's return. Picture the disciples gathered around Jesus as he spoke words that would echo through centuries. In Matthew 23:39, he looked upon Jerusalem and declared, "You shall see me no more till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." That statement was more than a lament. It was a key. It linked his glorious return to a future moment when the Jewish people as a nation would welcome him. This is a fact of Scripture, not a later interpretation. Jesus tied the timeline of his second coming to Israel's recognition. For 2,000 years, Christians have asked, when will he return? What must take place first? The answer is hidden in that one verse: Israel must call upon him. Until then, the story of redemption is incomplete, the curtain not yet fully lifted. Why is this significant? Because it shifts the focus away from speculation about political events or global disasters and places it on a promise God made to his chosen people. The question is not if Israel will recognize Jesus, but when. And when they do, it will be the turning point of history. Think about it. The same city that once shouted, "Crucify him," will one day cry, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." The greatest rejection in history will become the greatest acceptance. And that shift will not just change Israel, it will unleash a spiritual awakening so vast that the whole world will feel its impact. But how will this happen? How can a nation that has carried centuries of blindness suddenly see? To answer that, we must step into the ancient prophecy of Zechariah and uncover the signs that God revealed. The first of those signs has already been unfolding before our very eyes. The first sign: Israel becomes a cup of trembling. Zechariah 12:2 speaks with haunting clarity. "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the surrounding peoples." To the ancient world, a cup of trembling was no casual image. It referred to a cup forced upon someone that left them disoriented, unstable, and unable to think clearly. And history shows us exactly how this prophecy has played out. When David Ben-Gurion stood in Tel Aviv in 1948 and read the declaration of Israel's rebirth, it was the birth of a miracle. After 1,900 years of exile, persecution, and wandering, a nation, long thought dead, rose in a single day, just as Isaiah 66:8 had foretold. But within hours, 5 surrounding armies attacked, determined to wipe out this newborn state. By every calculation, Israel should have been crushed. They had outdated weapons, barely trained soldiers, and many of them were Holocaust survivors, still reeling from unspeakable trauma. Yet against all odds, they prevailed. This pattern has repeated again and again. In 1967, facing a coalition of 11 nations, Israel not only survived, but captured Jerusalem in 6 astonishing days. In 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was unprepared and on the brink of defeat, the tide turned inexplicably. Armies stronger on paper faltered. Strategies collapsed. What should have been certain victory for Israel's enemies became stunning reversal. And the prophecy doesn't stop at military campaigns. Today, Israel occupies only a fraction of the world's land, yet it draws more condemnation at the United Nations than all other nations combined. Universities across the globe organize boycotts against Israel while ignoring regimes guilty of mass atrocities. News media covers Israel with disproportionate negativity compared to nations with far worse records. Why? Because as Zechariah said, the nations are drinking from the cup of trembling. Their obsession is irrational, their judgments distorted. The siege has taken new forms: diplomatic, economic, academic. But the result is always the same. Those who drink from the cup find themselves stumbling, weakened, and ultimately harmed by their own hostility. History bears this out, and prophecy confirms it. But Zechariah's vision did not stop with trembling. He foresaw something heavier, more impossible to carry. That leads us to the second prophetic sign, a burden that has crushed every empire that dared to seize it. The second sign, Jerusalem, the burdensome stone. Zechariah 12:3 declares, "And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces." To the ancient listener, the image was striking. A burdensome stone was a test of strength. Men would attempt to lift it to prove their power, only to injure themselves in the process. The prophecy was clear. Any nation that tried to seize Jerusalem would end up wounding itself. History has confirmed this again and again. In 1948, Arab armies sought to split Jerusalem and strangle the young state. Instead, Israel gained control over part of the city. In 1967, multiple nations declared their aim to recapture Jerusalem. They did not just fail, they lost the entire city. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launched their coordinated assault with Jerusalem as a primary prize, yet their campaign ended with Israel positioned within striking distance of Cairo and Damascus. Each attempt to carry away the stone has left the hands that reached for it bloodied and broken. But the prophecy also reaches beyond battles. It speaks of confusion and madness striking the enemies of Judah. Horses, symbols of military might, would be blinded, and riders would make irrational decisions. This is not speculation. History has shown it. Egypt closing the Straits of Tiran, Jordan, entering a war it could not win. Syria attacking when it lacked the strength to hold its ground. These were not the choices of careful generals. They were decisions clouded by something deeper, something prophetic. And now in our own generation, we see a different kind of struggle over Jerusalem. Nations do not merely fight with tanks and jets. They gather in council chambers and courtrooms. United Nations resolutions, international tribunals, diplomatic initiatives, all circling around one city. The burdensome stone is now political as much as it is territorial. And the more nations try to redefine, divide, or erase Jerusalem, the more fractured and divided they themselves become. prophecy adds an even more chilling dimension. Ezekiel 38 names a coalition unlike anything Israel had faced in earlier centuries. Russia, Iran, Turkey, and others, forming a northern alliance that will one day come against the land of Israel. During the Cold War, this seemed impossible. But now, Russia sells weapons to Iran. Turkey has turned eastward. Their forces already operate in Syria just beyond Israel's northern border. The burdensome stone grows heavier. This raises a sobering question when the world finally tries to lift Jerusalem, who will be cut in pieces. Prophecy says it will not be Israel. The breaking will fall on those who oppose her. But the story does not end with defeat and judgment. For in the ashes of this global conflict lies a far greater mystery, the intervention of God Himself stepping into history in a way that cannot be denied. God's intervention, the day the nations will know. Ezekiel 39 paints a picture unlike any military history book. It describes a coalition that rises with power, confident in its numbers and weapons, only to be shattered in a way no army can explain. I will knock the bow out of your left hand and cause the arrows to fall out of your right hand. You shall fall upon the mountains of Israel, and the nations shall know that I am the Lord. This is not Israel's doing. It is not the result of clever strategy or advanced technology. It is God Himself stepping onto the battlefield. Zechariah confirms this vision with breathtaking detail. In Zechariah 14:3-4, he writes, "Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, and His feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives." Consider that for a moment. The very place where Jesus once ascended into heaven will become the place where He stands to defend His people. Prophecy ties the beginning of His reign to the geography of Jerusalem itself. History offers glimpses of the pattern, but prophecy shows us the climax. We have seen irrational choices, failed invasions, and nations left weaker after opposing Israel. But the day will come when the scale is so overwhelming, the enemy coalition so vast, that the outcome cannot be explained away. When Israel survives, the world will be forced to admit it was not human resilience, but divine intervention. Even those who reject faith will have no other explanation. Some scholars have speculated about how this might happen. Could it involve natural disasters, like earthquakes or plagues? Could it be supernatural phenomena that defy science? The exact details remain in God's hands, but Scripture leaves no ambiguity about the result. The armies fall, Israel survives, and the nations will know who truly reigns. Think about what that moment will mean. For centuries, skeptics have asked why God does not make Himself obvious, why He hides in mystery. But here in the land of Israel, prophecy says the veil will be ripped away. God's protection will be undeniable. Yet this is only the prelude. For after the nations fall, something even more astonishing takes place, an awakening not of armies, but of hearts. The third sign, the Spirit of grace poured out. Zechariah 12:10 contains one of the most moving promises in all of prophecy. I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced. This is not symbolic language, it is precise. The Messiah would be pierced, something unimaginable to Zechariah's audience, since crucifixion was not yet practiced among the Jews. Centuries later, the Roman execution of Jesus fulfilled this prophecy to the letter. But the prophecy does not end at the crucifixion. It points forward to a national recognition, a moment when scales will fall from millions of Jewish eyes at once. Notice the order Zechariah gives. First, God pours out the Spirit of grace, then the people look upon the one they pierced. That means this revelation will not be the result of human persuasion or missionary effort. It will be divine intervention, a supernatural unveiling of truth that no debate, no argument, no political pressure could ever achieve. Imagine what that moment will feel like. Across Israel and around the world, Jewish people suddenly understanding that every sacrifice, every Passover lamb, every festival, every prophecy was pointing to Jesus of Nazareth. Their mourning will be profound. As Zechariah says, they will grieve as for an only son. Yet their joy will be greater still, for the Messiah they long for has already come, and he is returning. The Apostle Paul saw this day as the hinge of history. In Romans 11:12, he wrote that if Israel's rejection brought reconciliation to the world, their acceptance will be life from the dead. This is more than a poetic phrase. It suggests global revival, a resurrection-like awakening across nations when Israel embraces her Messiah. The faith that began in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago will return to Jerusalem, igniting a fire that will spread across the earth. Can you picture the headlines when it happens? News anchors struggling to explain how millions simultaneously turn to Jesus. Skeptics silenced by the undeniable. Believers around the world electrified with hope. Yet even this is not the end. To understand why Israel's recognition has been delayed for so long and why its arrival will be so dramatic, we need to look back at the reasons the nation turned away in the first place. Why Israel rejected Jesus for 2,000 years. To understand the weight of Israel's future recognition, we must first grapple with the reasons for their long rejection. Scripture and history show us it was never a simple matter of stubbornness. It was a divine mystery unfolding across centuries. The first reason is expectation. In the first century, Israel longed for a political Messiah. They were under Roman occupation, paying taxes to Caesar, watching foreign soldiers patrol their streets. Their prayers cried out for another David, a warrior king who would drive out oppressors. So when Jesus came preaching humility, healing the sick, and blessing the meek, he seemed to many like a disappointment. They wanted a lion. He came as a lamb. In fact, the crown would come, but only after the cross. The second reason is that hardened hearts were foretold. Romans 11:8 tells us God has given them a spirit of stupor, eyes that they should not see, and ears that they should not hear. This was not an accident. It was part of the plan of blindness allowed so that the gospel could burst beyond Israel's borders and reach the Gentiles. Their rejection opened the door for the nations, but Paul assures us this blindness is only temporary. The third reason is that Jesus redefined holiness. He touched lepers, welcomed tax collectors, and forgave prostitutes. To a culture that prized external purity, this was scandalous. He was holy on the inside, yet he shattered their categories of who could be loved and redeemed. The fourth reason is the scandal of the cross itself. In 1 Corinthians 1:23, Paul writes, "We preach Christ crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block." Crucifixion meant curse. How could the Messiah chosen of God die in such disgrace? What they saw as weakness was in truth the cure for the curse of sin. Finally, the fifth reason, God's plan was not finished. Romans 11:25 says, "Blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in." Their story is not over. The blindness has an expiration date. When the veil is lifted, Israel will look upon the one they pierced, and history will turn on its hinge. This raises a thrilling question. If their rejection opened the way for salvation to reach the world, what will their acceptance unleash? To answer that, we must look at what is happening right now, a movement already stirring signs of the veil beginning to lift. Signs of the veil lifting today. For nearly 2 millennia, Jewish believers in Jesus were so few they could be counted in the thousands. In 1948, the year Israel became a modern nation, there were fewer than 4,000 known Jewish followers of Christ worldwide. Today, that number exceeds 350. That is an increase of nearly 9,000% in just over 75 years. These are not vague statistics, they are evidence of a shift already underway. The growth of Messianic Judaism is one of the most remarkable spiritual movements of our time. Fact: Jewish men and women are rediscovering their own scriptures. Isaiah 53's suffering servant psalm, 22's piercing of hands and feet, Daniel's precise timeline for Messiah, and realizing that Jesus fulfills them with startling accuracy. Entire congregations of Messianic Jews now worship in Hebrew, proclaiming Yeshua as Messiah while retaining their Jewish identity. For centuries, Israel seemed sealed under blindness, but today, the seal shows cracks. Some suggest this is the drizzle before the downpour Zechariah foresaw, when the Spirit of grace will be poured out upon the whole nation. Others note that in a world increasingly hostile to faith, Jewish testimonies of encountering Jesus are multiplying with unusual boldness. These are not isolated stories. They form a pattern, a rising wave pointing toward the prophecy yet to be fulfilled. But here is where the mystery deepens. If the veil is beginning to lift now, what will it mean when the full unveiling comes? What will happen when Israel as a nation declares Jesus as Messiah? Paul's words give us the answer: life from the dead. That phrase does not describe a quiet shift. It describes a resurrection-level transformation, a spiritual awakening so vast that the entire world will be changed. And that brings us to the final and most breathtaking stage of the prophecy: the coming awakening and its global impact. When Paul wrote in Romans 11:15, "For if their being cast away is the reconciling of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead?" He was pointing to a day when Israel's recognition of Jesus would ripple far beyond their borders. Their rejection opened the door for the gospel to spread through Gentile nations. Their acceptance will ignite something even greater, a spiritual resurrection for the entire world. Imagine it. The very people through whom God gave the law, the prophets, and the Messiah himself, finally proclaiming Jesus as Lord. Synagogues transformed into places of worship for Yeshua. Scholars and rabbis opening the Hebrew scriptures and teaching Christ from Moses, Isaiah, and the Psalms. News networks struggling to explain how an entire nation could turn in one voice to the crucified and risen Messiah. This will not be a localized revival. It will be the catalyst for the greatest spiritual awakening in human history. Speculation suggests this awakening may reach into every culture, breaking down walls that centuries of doubt and division have built. When one of the longest-standing objections to Christianity, if Jesus was truly the Messiah, why don't the Jews believe, is erased, countless barriers to faith will fall. What once fueled skepticism will instead fuel faith. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will join their voices to declare Jesus as Messiah, and the gospel fire will spread with a force the world has never seen. But it is not only revival that prophecy promises. Jesus tied his return directly to this recognition. In Matthew 23:39, he said, "You shall see me no more till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That means Israel's awakening is not just a revival, it is preparation for the King's return. The nations will witness both the restoration of Israel and the unveiling of Christ, no longer as the suffering lamb, but as the conquering lion. Pause for a moment. If we are already seeing the first signs fulfilled, the trembling cup, the burdensome stone, the early drizzle of grace, then we may be closer than we realize to the final act. Closer to the day when Israel crowns her Messiah. Closer to the moment when the gates of history swing open and the King of Kings steps through. One day soon, the veil that has lingered over Israel will be lifted, and in that moment prophecy will not feel distant but alive. The rejection that once seemed final will be undone in a flood of grace, and the words of Jesus in Matthew 23:39 will echo across the land. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. This is not only about Israel's story, it is about ours too, because the same God who keeps his covenant with his people keeps his promises to you. When you feel unseen, forgotten, or unsure of your purpose, remember that the God who preserved a nation for 2,000 years is the same God who will finish the work he began in your life. So the question remains, if we are standing closer than ever to the day when Israel will recognize her Messiah, how will you prepare your heart for the return of the King? These mysteries are not meant to entertain curiosity alone. They are meant to stir us to readiness, to faith, and to hope. Thank you for walking this journey with me today. If this message opened your eyes to the depth of God's plan, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the next revelation hidden in Scripture. Until then, may the Lord bless you, keep you, and give you peace until the day we all together say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.